So in my current music career, I always am talking to Mary about getting on the radar of being that hired gun, drummer for hire, and getting out into those bands that are already super established that have a name. And I've brought up Tesla many times because I love the band Tesla. Anyway, so I brought up Tesla, and I know that Troy Lucetta was taking like a 2-year break from being in the band, and I thought that's a perfect band that I could play in. Love that band. I know a lot of their songs already, so that's trying to get on that radar of bands like that. So anyway, how I ended up in Midline was still, even when I was a late teen, early 20s, it was getting on the radar of bands who were really doing cool things. And so I first heard of Midline in early 90s, because that's when the band formed, was in 1990. And I was playing in a band called Tuesday's Child with Ian Waters, Jim McCrosty, and John Brown was our bass player. So this had to be like 91, 92. And that's how I met the guys in Midline, was playing with Tuesday's Child. If you guys know who Jim McCrosty is, he's an amazing guitar player, and I played with him not only in Tuesday's Child, but Cure for the Fall and some other stuff. And he was also guitarist in Half the World, and now he plays guitar and produces the band Gorgeous George. And then Ian Waters, of course, he ended up going on to have a band called Kid Corduroy, and then later was the front of house engineer for Built to Spill. So there's all these crazy little connections going everywhere. And we used to do shows around town with Midline. And the first person I had met was the original bass player, Jason Yates. And I was working at a movie theater. So I'm like 19 years old, almost 20. And I would see people come into the movies, and if they looked like they were a musician, I would just start a conversation with him. And Jason Yates was one of those. And so I had met Jason, was the first one I had met in the band. And then, of course, Anthony already knew Jim already knew Anthony and Scott, because Tuesday's Child had done shows with Midline prior to me being in the band. So that's how I got to know those guys. And Midline would had organized these shows in the Grove on a Wednesday night. We would have thousands of people show up. They had Rick Schroeder and Wheeze, who had a company called Arena Sound and Lighting. And so Anthony and Scott made friends with Wheeze and with Rick Schroeder and put on these concerts. This concert series later became, my son Elliot is in the producer's room and he's making faces at me through the glass. My kids like to make fun of me, and probably for good reason. But yeah, it's all laughter here at the Fisher House. You guys know that. We're a bunch of nutballs here. So anyway, Anthony and Scott made friends with Rick Schroeder, and all my musician friends who are probably close in my age are well aware of Rick and his dedication to the local music scene, amongst other things. And Anthony and Scott made friends with him, and so they started putting on these shows, and they did it 2 years in a row on a Wednesday night in downtown Boise at the Grove, which, once the Downtown Boise Association got involved with that, there were no more rock metal bands. That became what became Alive After 5. So Midline is kind of the spark that started that whole thing. Did something cool, business people got involved and said, move over, kids, we're going to do something that is different. But at any rate, that's how that happened. So I got to know those guys, and I got to become really good friends with John Conley, the drummer. And Midline looked like rock stars, played awesome songs, played these big shows. Anthony and Scott just had this vision of what they wanted to do, and they were attacking that vision. And although my band was really, really great, not everybody in the band was like 100% dedicated to that. It was kind of like, yeah, this is something we do for fun, and we'll play some shows once in a while. Where Midline, on the other hand, is like, this is our life, this is what we're doing, and that's how I want it to be. So I aligned myself with those guys and became friends with them, not because I hoped to be in the band one day, but I just wanted to be around those people of that mindset. And I ended up having an opportunity to audition for a band from Florida, working for a company called Worldwide Showcase. And I had, that summer of 1992, summer of 92, I auditioned to go on tour with a band that Worldwide Showcase managed called XL, like extra large. And so I auditioned, sent all my material, and I didn't get the job. But then I kept calling them every week, and then every other couple days they said no, they had 4 different bands that they managed, and all those drummer positions were filled. Well, I kept hassling them. I didn't feel like I was hassling them, but I think in my mind today that I was probably hassling them. And I kept saying, I would go on the road in any capacity, even as a tour manager. I would go. I just wanted to be on tour, and I wanted to play the drums. So I had told my boss that I worked for that it was coming down to, I think their camp started at the beginning of August. It was already into the first week of August, and I told my boss, I said, I didn't get the job, I don't have the gig, so I'm not leaving. That was like on a Wednesday. I had kind of just put out of my mind, oh, this isn't going to happen. I'll continue playing with my band here, etc. And so on Friday morning of that same week, I got a phone call from Tampa Bay, Florida, from Worldwide Showcase, and they said that they had a drummer position open, that drummer quit or whatever his reasons for not doing it, and that if I could be in Florida by Sunday morning, I had the job. So I immediately called my dad, because my dad worked in Boise, and I was really excited. I said, hey, I got the job, and I need to be in Florida by Sunday morning at the latest. And my dad said, okay, so this is when you could actually just go drive to the airport and walk in and buy a ticket. There was no online ticket sales, right? So my dad bought me a plane ticket. I went to work Friday night, and I told my boss, I said, it's my last day. And I think she was happy for me, but she was also pretty disappointed at the same time that, her chance to find somebody to fill my spot was now under 24 hours. So that put a lot of pressure on them. But I was chasing my dream, right? So I went on tour with Showcase, and I was gone from home for 7 months. That's the longest I've ever been away from home touring drumming. I did 203 shows in 7 months. You say, well, how is that possible? Well, we did high school assembly programs, so we'd play a concert in the morning, and then we go to another location and play a concert in the afternoon, and then we go to another location and play a concert at night. So more or less 2 to 3 shows every day, 5 days a week, and sometimes on Saturdays, Saturday nights. So I came home with leather hands. The calluses were so thick. But through the company, I had a Yamaha drum endorsement, Zildjian cymbal endorsement, and Capella drumstick endorsement, and that was pretty cool. But anyway, that tour ended. I came home and looked at putting my band back together, which became Ritual Bliss. If any of my older musician friends remember, I assembled Ritual Bliss, and then we started doing shows with Midline. At this point, Jason Yates was no longer in the band. John England had been in the band for a short time, and then Alf Deverona came in and was the bass player, and he's the bass player that plays on the first Midline record. And Alf and I immediately had this amazing rhythm section relationship. But I just kind of jumped off. So anyway, Midline was playing, doing lots of shows, and they recorded a record, and they ended up getting on the radio. And at the time, the radio station wasn't the X, it was known as Pirate Radio. It was an independently owned radio station. And they put Midline on there first, like on the typical Sunday night local shows, and then they started playing Midline here and there throughout the day and the week, and then they ended up being on hot rotation, which meant 48 plays per week. And so record sales were going like crazy, and I went down to Grady's basement one night, just networking, and usually Anthony and Scott from Midline were sitting in the same spot all the time. Well, they weren't there, and I ran into the girlfriend of the drummer of the band Happenstance. So Chad Waite, his girlfriend, I think her name was Jennifer. I ran into her, and I asked where Chad was, and she said he's playing his last show with Happenstance at the Dreamwalker. And Dreamwalker was like a coffee shop that rock and metal bands played at. It wasn't like today's coffee shop where you have some acoustic guitar guy singing over in the corner. This was like a little concert venue that served coffee, the Dreamwalker. So I was like, what? He's playing his last concert with Happenstance, and they said, yeah, Chad's going to play in Midline. And I was blown away. I could not believe that John Conley wasn't in the band. I had no clue what was happening. And of course, nobody from Midline was around to quiz them. So I walked down to the Dreamwalker, and Happenstance was just finishing their last show, and I talked to Chad, and I said, so word on the street is that you're going to be the drummer for Midline. He goes, yeah, I'm going to give it a shot, but he seemed kind of nervous about it, and so then immediately my gears are spinning like crazy. I thought, okay, my band's doing okay, but it's still not that group of people that is like all for one and one for all. We're just going to go for it. We're going to become this thing, and which was what I wanted to be a part of. Not that I wanted to just quit my band because of some internal conflict. That wasn't the case at all. It was for them, it was like a side hobby thing, and I was trying to make this my life, and I knew that about Midline. So I immediately, without even being asked or approached by anybody, I just kind of knew the players of the scene, and so I started rehearsing the Happenstance album and the Midline album back to back, multiple times a day. I knew every Midline song, I knew every Happenstance song, exactly how they were recorded, 100% without a doubt. I only did that on the chance that one of those two bands would ask me to audition. So I already knew that Happenstance would need a drummer, and I wasn't sure if Chad was going to work out playing for Midline. So I wanted to be prepared. So that's what I did. Well, I went and saw Midline perform a couple times with Chad, and Chad's a really great drummer, but it didn't have the punch you in the face drumming that John Conley had playing with the band. And so my suspicions were pretty accurate that Chad wasn't going to work out with that band. And I think I had talked to Jason or Jamie from Happenstance, and I don't think they were really into keeping their band going. So I went to maybe my third or fourth show. I had seen Midline playing with Chad, and the last one I went to, Scotty came walking up to me, and comes walking over, and he's like, Fredley, when are you going to come jam with us? Kind of bobbing his head as he walked. And I said, just let me know when. And I want to say, he was like, we practice every day, so why don't you show up tomorrow? He's like, okay. So I packed my drums up and went to the Midline rehearsal space that next night. And played every single one of their songs perfectly. And that's when Alf and I were like, oh man, we're joined at the hip as a rhythm section. And just the power that Midline had playing was just so great. And Anthony says, well, you want to do a gig with us and see how that goes? And yeah, of course. So I got to be in the band at the time. All this radio play was happening for Midline. And we were on hot rotation on pirate radio, which became the X. Like I said, 48 plays a week. We released four singles off that album to the radio, and we sold over 10,000 CDs just in the Treasure Valley market. And that shows you the power of radio, right? And so when you're on the radio that often, even though I wasn't the drummer on the record, I was the one playing all the shows, and you just go around town, and of course everybody recognizes you because they've seen you play and they've heard you on the radio a gazillion times. And so we definitely felt like rock stars everywhere we went. I was dating Mary at that time, and we went to the fair, And it was really annoying to her at the time, but we couldn't walk 10, 15 feet without somebody stopping and wanting to talk to you. And we thought that was cool to have that kind of attention. Not that we were walking around with our chest puffed up or anything. We've always been kind of the same people for all these years. And so just kind of riding high on that whole thing. And it's a real shame that once that radio station was gone, the Sunday night music program is awesome. I mean, any radio play ever at any time is good for a band. But, you know, when they take an unsigned band and put them on the radio, record labels were calling like crazy, management companies were calling like crazy. We had a lot of traction in our corner at that time. And so we got ready. We were writing songs and got ready to record the next album. We actually did go into Audio Lab to record the second record. And when that was starting, the tracking of that record was winding up, I had already gone and done this tour with this company. And so the business side of music was like really just drilled into my head working for that company. Midline was kind of lacking in the business department of, you know, keeping track of finances and all of those kind of things. And we kind of, the band laughs about it now, but at the time it was pretty intense stuff. So I had a pretty strong difference of opinion on how things should be working and running. And, you know, it wasn't just about playing shows and the recognition. It was like, let's lay the groundwork so that we could make this our living, you know, so that when we aren't playing shows, we don't have day jobs and those kind of things. So things that I can't talk about on camera all led to I was out of the band, which was super unfortunate. So that whole record was scrapped, and they got Tim Allen in the band and recorded a new record called Damage Done, which that record also did pretty well. Not as well as the first one, but again, they didn't have the radio play that we had initially, but still the big shows, doing some touring throughout the Northwest and those kind of things. I left and went and toured with another band from Michigan. I was pretty freshly married, and I was away for 3 months. I was on that tour, and when I came back, I tried putting another band together, which just kind of was limping along, and Tim Allen had ended up being injured and couldn't play a show that Midline had worked on really hard to get. And Anthony called me in a panic. And this is once our friendships have, enough time had passed, we started talking again and became friends, and which was great to mend those friendships. And so I just looked at it as they needed a drummer to do these handful of shows while Tim had been injured. I think he hurt his foot or something. And so some other drama, again, off camera had happened, and Tim had left the band, and so now I was back in the band. I was gone from the band for nearly 2 years. Back in the band supporting a second album that I was not on. But again, the momentum started rolling pretty quick. Steiny was also in the band at this point. I think Alf had left the band shortly after I had left, and he decided to go to college and all of those kind of things. And Stymie was an awesome fit, and again, Stymie and I had this incredible relationship between bass and drums, and just like this muscle car machine. We weren't pretty, but we were tough. So we kept going, and I mean, again, it was like I was back with these people that were super driven to being rock stars. We wanted to be rock stars. I grew up watching MTV. I liked all the hair metal bands. Most of my friends liked Ozzy and those kind of things, but I wanted to be a rock and roll drummer. That was my whole goal, was to do that, and I was in a band of brothers who also wanted that same thing. And so we looked at arena shows. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to be an arena rock band, like Kiss. Everybody wanted to be Kiss when we were little, and so we thought we were on our way to becoming Kiss. And we ended up recording our third record, which I was on, called In for a Quick Garden. And our whole goal with that record is we were going to go to a different studio with a different producer who was just going to bump the quality of the recording up to where people could just, if we send it out, they could put it on the radio immediately, not come back and go, well, it's not radio quality. And that the songs were really good too. So we did that. Our whole goal was to record this record, and at that time, the early 2000s, records were long. They had, you bought a CD, it had like 12 to 15 songs on it. I think In for the Quick Garden has 14 songs on it, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I've actually looked at that record. So that's exactly what we did. Put together this great record, released it on our own. It was selling really well in Boise. We were getting a lot of the big shows that were coming through, playing at the Big Easy and places like that. We had done some arena shows. We did 2 arena shows with Motley Crue, stuff with Godsmack, all of those kind of things. And so we started soliciting our material to record labels, and one was Island Records, and Island Records had U2 was one of their biggest artists on that. So we thought, oh man, it's really, really close that we could become label mates with the band U2, and we made it past all the gatekeepers at Island Records and made it to the president's desk, and they had 3 bands on the table. They were going to sign 2 of those bands. So it was Midline, a band called Injected, and another little band that some of you might have heard of called Hoobastank. They went back and forth, and this took a couple weeks of discussion. They signed Hoobastank, and they signed Injected. They passed on us, which was, took the wind out of our sails. Hoobastank, of course, went on to be successful. The band Injected got shelved. Their album didn't get released for like 8 years or something crazy like that. I liked the band Injected when I first I bought the record because I wanted to know who got this spot, but I'm glad they didn't sign us and shelve us. That would have been terrible. And that's a whole nother legal fiasco and a financially draining position to be in, because you're dealing with lawyers and all of those kind of things, trying to get out of your record contract, and you can't even sell your music because it's been shoved aside. That record company owns that music. So we continued shopping our stuff around, and another friend of ours who was working at a radio station in Portland at the time, he had some relationship with this record label called Gotham Records, an independent label. And so he told Scott about it, and Scott was like pretty flippant in his response, like, yeah, you're full of it, kind of, I'll make the phone calls. So anyway, we ended up sending our material to this independent label, Gotham Records, and through a course of events, we ended up getting a record deal with them. And the cool thing about that is their distribution was with Warner Brothers, and they had a tight connection also with Maverick Records, which was under Warner Brothers. And Maverick Records, I think I mentioned a while back with the Candlebox thing, was Madonna's record label. So anyway, we were like, well, this is a pretty good opportunity to be with an independent label, and the tour support in our contract looked pretty good, and the distribution was amazing. I mean, there was some major label artists that had trouble getting the kind of distribution that was available to us. So our record was in every record store in the entire United States. You could go just about anywhere. I know we were on our way to we were on the Jägermeister music tour with Saliva and Breaking Benjamin, and when we were on our way to meet up in Chicago, we stopped at a mall somewhere in Wyoming and just walked in the mall and went into a music store, and there was Midline. It was the record stores used to have these listening stations at the end of an aisle that had new music, and you could put on headphones and listen, and our record was right there. You could just listen to the album. It was pretty cool. Unfortunately, the record label wasn't promotion-wise, couldn't afford to keep to push us how we thought we needed to be pushed. Again, lawyers and sharks come along, and now we're touring out of our own pockets, which is again not unheard of that bands do that. But when everybody in the band has a credit card that's completely maxed out, and family and friends are no longer contributing to it, the wheels on the bus don't go round and round. So we came home, and then we had to recover financially from that huge expense, and that was trying times for sure. Eventually put out another record, which was called Wreckage, which I wrote the song, the title track to that album, and continued doing shows. And I just felt like the end of 2008, I personally was mentally fried, and I beating my head against the wall. You go and you do all these big shows. You're opening for people in front of 1,000 people or several thousand people, and the band not making one freaking dollar from those shows. And so you're constantly footing the bill, getting paid in exposure. Well, any outdoors person knows how many people die from exposure. That'll kill a band. Exposure kills bands. It can kill a band. If you're just doing it constantly for exposure, it's just going to kill it, because you can't feasibly financially. I mean, you can't even pay for parking in the parking garage, right? You don't make enough from the show to. You just we're going to sell 4 T-shirts. That'll get us 30 miles down the road. Garbage, I say, garbage. So anyway, that's where I was mentally. I freaking had it. And so I went to the band and I said, guys, I can't keep making these runs to LA and San Diego and Seattle and Spokane and all of that. I had started a family, and I was like, it's not about me anymore. I need to take care of my wife. I need to take care of my young children. And I gotta time out. and at that point, Scott and Stymie had started another band called Karen Comes Killing. So they were in 2 bands. And it was like my love and desire had disappeared. It had taken its toll. And I was kind of in this mindset like, I'm going to throw in the towel. I'm going to give up on drumming. So this is the end of 2008. So it was spring, going into spring of 2009. We decided we were going to play our last show, and off we go, right? Well, that lasted 3 years. I had started. Well, my throwing in the towel lasted about 48 hours, because once the weight and reality of that midline was over, it hit me that all the good times, those memories flooded back, and they most certainly outweighed all the bad times and all the frustration. And I looked at Mary and I'm like, I think maybe I made a mistake. And she's like, no, you can still play the drums, but maybe just change your focus on what you're going to do. And like I said, Scott and Stymie had started Karen Comes Killing. And I was focusing on building my landscaping construction business, and that was my focus. And so I became one of those guys that I was just doing this as a hobby, and put together Cure for the Fall, which I brought Alfred Deverona back into my musical life, and back with Jim McCrosty, and then we courted Cliff Miller pretty heavily, who had a band called Abrupt Edge. And we put this really cool hard rock band together called Cure for the Fall. And we started playing shows. And loved that band. Again, it was just everybody in the band was just like this kind of something they kind of did. It wasn't, I mean, I fell back into that, this is what I'm doing for a living kind of a mindset. And so the X, who had still supported Midline as a local band, they were having a birthday party for I think Big J and Nick, their morning show. And I don't remember what anniversary it was, but they approached Anthony about, can Midline get back together to do one show for this birthday party we're going to have at the Knitting Factory? And so that was That's been a while now. And we decided, yeah, we would do that one-off show. Well, we all got together in this very room at that point and started jamming together and remembered that we loved it and we loved each other, and we were going to do this show, and then that one show turned into another show. And so that was, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2012, 13, somewhere in there. The band was back together, and then, of course, some people know that Scott Elliott went through some health issues, which led to us bringing JB in as not only a backup guitar player, but also became a full member of the band. And once all that happened, Scott went through his stuff, and I think he still deals with it to some degree. COVID happened, which we all know that COVID destroyed a lot of things for a lot of bands, and I mean, people all over, all different walks, right? I mean, you couldn't be on this planet and not be affected by it in whatever way that affected those people. So, you know, some people in the band were a little more nervous about getting together than others, and so we decided, okay, we're not going to do anything for a while. And you know, they kept saying 2 weeks, flatten the curve, and then that got extended. So we weren't getting together to play. At the same time, Alf Verona and I had started playing country music with Cliff Miller, just quietly playing shows and doing that, which we're still doing now. But at any rate, Scott Elliott ended up leaving the band that winter in December, and then by spring, Steiny had left the band, so that left me, Anthony, and JB searching for a bass player. And we've been writing and recording. We actually just finished, JB just finished tracking guitars. We are sending that song off to be mixed by somebody else. Not that Mary can't do it, but there's a certain thing that Midline wants in our recording, and I think it's going to be worth it to have this relationship with this other mixing engineer. Once that actually is in play, then we'll say who that is. But again, while all this is happening, Midline's now in a position where the band is not collectively saying we're going to be rock stars, but I still am. So being on the radar, that's my next thing, is that's why I do Coffee with Fred, that's why I do drum covers, that's why I'm doing product reviews and those kind of things, is to try to push my name and my abilities out to a much larger audience. And right now, large audience lives on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Oh, Anthony's on here, my brother Anthony. Anthony says, so basically the morning after show got Midline back together. Yes. If I wasn't clear on that, Anthony just cleared it up for us. So thank you. Anthony is always going to be my brother. My birthday is June 7th, for all those who have lists of birthdays and presents to buy. And Anthony's is June 10th, so we're just 3 days apart, and Anthony and I always have a great time celebrating our birthdays together. Jeremy's on, Big J's on. Yep, he's one of the people responsible for this mess. We love Big J, and if you saw, I reshared a video of me and Anthony backstage at the Knitting Factory. I think the Knitting Factory had a fire at one point, if anybody remembers it, so they did a whole big, huge remodel. And but in one of the back rooms, there was this huge electrical panel, and Anthony was joking like, "Hey, if your band's set is running over, we're just gonna throw the switch on that." And Big J was back there with us when that happened. So, cheers, Big J. Love you, brother. So yeah, so getting back to like Midline's still together with me, Anthony, and JB, and right now Scott Alexander, the bass player from the band Dishwalla, is helping us out, at least in the capacity of recording bass for these songs that we're working on. And he's more or less said that he would be available if we did a show, that he could step up and play bass with us. So we're not handcuffed to this room necessarily, so we would like to get out there and do some shows. And since Big J's on here, maybe when the Free X shows start happening again, maybe consider Midline. We'd love to be a part of something like that. And but yeah, so as far as the band goes, like, we're not all in that mindset of like we're going to be big rock stars still. But now drumming is my life. That's my income. All comes from drumming. I've been able to make that happen. And so getting on the radar now of bands that need a drummer. That's the world that I'm trying to be, is that hired gun. And so again, this forum and all other social platforms, that's why you are starting to see so much out there, so that those people can find me easy. I know that U2 is having a residency in Vegas, and again, I'm like looking at U2 going, that's a job that I could play drums for U2, but I'm not on their radar. So that's my whole thing, is to get on those on the radar of those kind of people. So that's how I got into Midline, and kind of a little short history of the band. The band's been around since 1990, so that's now 33 years. Is that correct? 2020, yeah, 33 years. Not a lot of bands stick around together for longer than 6 months. So here we are, still doing it. Anyway, hope you guys have an awesome day.